Hey there, everyone. Today I would like to take you behind the scenes of an article that I'm writing for an academic writing class. And I think this will be helpful because this is a more technical version of what I do on all my lectures as I prepare a sort of loose collection of ideas which serve to prove some sort of point. And I think that this will be helpful for understanding what it's like to think as a scholar and to develop certain ideas in a scholarly, systematic way. And I find this to be a really brilliant sort of art form of thinking that is thinking philosophically and scholarly. And I'm going to take you through my sort of raw, very rudimentary notes for this article that I'm preparing, which is To Make Sound Sense and Sense Sound Kinnigan, Finnegan's Wake and the Question of Music. Now, one of the important things about writing academically is the structure. You want to make sure that you're planning out ahead of time what does the structure of your argument look like. And you want to have some sort of central thesis around which your solar system of ideas can circumambulate. And in this case, I have a sort of paragraph that I have created partly as a result of the necessary requirements for my class and kind of checking in with my professor, but also just because it's helpful for writing, is I have a paragraph dedicated here for me before I've actually written any of the article on what is kind of my central question or thesis, and also because I need to lay my cards out on the table, what are the theoretical frameworks I'm using and why am I approaching this question in this way? One of the great things about academic writing is anything that you say, you have to come with receipts showing why that is justified. And this means that you need to lay out your cards on the table ahead of time with, from what angle am I approaching this topic and why do I find it necessary to do that? So in this case, my essay topic is to respond to the question, to what extent can James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake be regarded as a type of music? Now, there are a lot of terms there that I will need to question, and I will need to define, and I will need to explicate and challenge as I go through my article. Using the theoretical frameworks of sound studies, performance criticism, and certain strains of multilingual linguistic studies and wake criticism, I will be arguing that in an important sense, Finnegan's Wake is a type of music. So that's my thesis right there, that Finnegan's Wake is a type of music. And I'm qualifying this utilizing musical structures / forms and techniques, including rhythm, tone and tonality, register, polyvocality, and more. So I've said exactly how I'm going to be arguing that it is a type of music, because these are the corollaries I see. Combining the theoretical underpinnings I have been researching, I will explicate the musicality of the wake using certain key passages as sites for close reading and musicological analysis. So that's the actual tool right there by which I'm going to be showing how these theoretical observations link directly to the text. So I'm going to be using certain key passages and I'm going to be close reading them and talking about textual examples that are going to support what I'm saying. So this is something that's always helpful to have in mind for any academic writing or any academic presentation or just thinking in a philosophical and scholarly manner. As I want to have kind of a guiding question and I want to have a thesis that responds to that question. I want to have certain reasons why I support that theoretically, and then I also want to have actual strategies and tools that are going to serve me methodologically. In this case, I'm going to be using close reading and musicology as my byway to connect my theoretical observations to my text. Now, what do I want to do from here? Well, I want to start to lay out some of the kind of nodes that I will be analyzing in my paper. And what do I mean by nodes? Well, I mean these kind of central locuses of ideas and concerns. These are like the planets in my solar system that is my paper. So these are kind of the things that revolve around the thesis and some of the important things that I'm going to be addressing. And I want to kind of lay out these in some sort of detail. Right now, just kind of getting stuff out on the page. So this is just kind of my preliminary work before I'm actually writing the paper of getting out, okay, what actually are my planets here? What are my nodes that I'm going to be using? What are the main parts of Finnegan's Wake that I think are so musical? What are some of the main byways that I'm going to be doing that? So I say that I'm going to show how, since the beginning of Work in Progress, which is what Finnegan's Wake was called as it was being serially published, Joyce's last work has been understood to be deeply implicated in spoken language and vocal discourse. And here I put a note for myself, see the critical reception in the James Joyce Critical Heritage Series, Volume 2. Auditory performance in some form or fashion has been understood to be central to understanding Finnegan's Wake's singularity since its earliest debut, and critics have always explicated it by using musical metaphors, analogies, and imagery. So this is how I'm thinking I'm going to start my paper, because I want to have some sort of hook where I ground my writing as an authority figure, where I say that, look, I know how my thesis and my theoretical frameworks fit into the history of ideas concerning how this has been approached. So in this case, I'm going to show and signal that, yes, I understand that music and Finnegan's Wake has been something that has been talked about since the beginning. And of course, I'm going to argue for some particular ideas concerning music and particular instances of it in Finnegan's Wake that hasn't been theorized on yet. But I want to start by just showing that I understand the lay of the land, so to speak. And here I've put in a break, and I've got a first instance of how I'm going to be actually going about doing this. And a lot of this you're going to see is not understood without some explication, which I will do as I go through this. And that's important. You want this to be for you. This structural layout of what your argument is going to look like, what are your tools, this is something that doesn't have to be readable for anyone else. So this is just my personal document. And in this case, the FFFF motif is what I have bracketed here. It's from Langland's Piers Plowman. A fair field full of folk found I there between. And I, as I've been reading Finnegan's Wake, had early on seen what I thought were allusions to this theme from Langland's Piers Plowman. And I haven't heard any scholars talk about this. So over the last year, let's say, I've been collecting instances of this fair field full of folk theme. And here I am going to analyze how this motif, showing a spectrum of auditory resemblances, extends to the very edge of auditory contiguity. Because there reaches a certain point when looking at different motifs in either Wagner or Joyce, where we wonder, to what extent are these the same theme? Because these themes and these motifs, they're going to change their context, and as they do, the very internal mechanics of them are going to change. So my question that I want to address more fully in my article is, at what point is this really a Langland reference and not just F alliteration? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I've created here a table of quotes from Finnegan's Wake that I think are allusions to this fair field full of folk theme, which I'll have there. And then I have references to the page and line numbers in the proper citation format for Finnegan's Wake scholarship. And this just serves to further put my cards on the table for myself, to have a tabulated list of these motifs and be able to look at them and see, okay, what are their similarities and differences? Because I need to be theorizing before I actually start writing. I need to be thinking about, okay, how exactly do these different data points connect together and serve to accentuate or challenge my point? And you can see here for myself, I've got this sort of primary reference, a Phantom City fake to film folk, which I've bolded because I think that this is the major instance of this theme or this motif being directly alluded to by Joyce. But clearly I've got a number of other ones on here that I think are degrees of hearkening to that motif. So throughout my paper, I think that one of the points that I want to focus on is this motif, because this will serve to explicate my larger points about the musicality of Finnegan's Wake, because I can talk about the relationship between musical motifs and literary motifs, and talk about how the literary motifs of Finnegan's Wake are also musical motifs. So this is a way that I have actually laid out the sort of data points of what am I going to have to work with, and I can use this to support my points that I'm trying to make. So I put a little note down here that it shows how units can hearken auditorily to one another beyond content. That is, not all of these references concern fair fields full of folk, creating degrees of hearkening that form a musical web of associations. And you might see this and think, well, some scholars have already said something similar to this. And that's the point. Sometimes things that you are saying in scholarship, people have already talked about them to a certain extent. But what I'm doing here is I'm trying to further concretize a point I see being made in scholarship, but not being emphasized in its properly musical ways. And then this is another tool that I think that you should use in your academic writing, which is an annotated bibliography. Now, I had to do this as an actual formal requirement for my class, but I found that it's actually a very helpful way for planning my process, because what an annotated bibliography does is it's like a normal bibliography where you have your sources listed in your proper citational formats, but then you also have an explication summarizing what does the source say, so giving a short summary, and then also talking about how does it contribute to the project you're proposing. So in this case, I talk about each of the sources and talk about what does it do, and then how does it serve to advance my argument. So these are in alphabetical order by last name, as a bibliography would be, and I am merely talking about how do they contribute to my argument. Now, you might not use all of your sources that you have listed, but it's nice to have a few just laid out there so that you can see, okay, what is the actual stock that I have to pull from here? And from there, you can draft and you can whittle things down. You can say, okay, that actually wasn't as helpful as I thought, or I'm weaving too wide of a net. And you want to kind of find a nice middle ground where you have a solid thesis and you have a few solid points supporting it. And it's better to have a few solid points than a lot of not very solid points. So you want your sources to, in some way, congregate around your thesis and form a sort of tightly packed network where each step logically follows from the next. And this logicality of form is also going to have to do with the flow of your writing, but you want all of your analyses to seem pertinent and necessary. You want each point that you bring up to contribute solidly to your thesis, and you as a writer to be able to say ahead of time, how, in what way does this participate in moving forward my thesis? And if it doesn't do that, you might consider adding it as a footnote, so you can just kind of hand wave to it and say, hey, this is an idea I have, but this is a footnote. This is not in the body of my article because maybe it doesn't support or it doesn't lend credence to my thesis. It might be interesting, but it might not be directly relevant. And you really want to try to make your academic writing directly relevant to each point that you're trying to make. So these are just a little bit of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm writing academically, and I think that these will be helpful for anyone who is considering writing an academic paper or trying to do a lecture like the kind that I do here on the channel. I wouldn't do this much research for a lecture typically. I mean, I've got a lot of sources here. Depends really on what lecture I'm doing. Oftentimes I'm just drawing from implicit knowledge that I have already studied in the past, and I'm not doing all this formal layout, but sometimes I do like to have a few ideas on the screen, and I like to, write them out on a note on my MacBook, or I like to have them on my phone, or I like to write them on a piece of paper and kind of have a loose architecture similar to this. So in many ways, academic writing is just a more pronounced version of the kind of stuff that I do in these lectures, which I try to make as academic as possible. And my hope is that this will kind of help people understand some of the tools that academics have as they use and approach their arguments, and also what it means to formulate an academic thesis and to defend it academically. So that being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's been somewhat interesting. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, and postcolonial studies. You can also check out my channel membership, which you can join for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you'd just like to donate to the channel because it really helps me out. That's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.